But before we do, just in the interest of gender balance, really, we're going to invite Peter Dunphy to join us, who's Director at Unite to Remain. And for those that don't know Peter, there is no man, no being on the planet who knows more about all things electoral compliance and how parties work, and he understands the constitutional map better than anybody. So we're all happy to take questions. If you could let us know your name and where you're from, that would be really helpful. Thank you. On the right there. Should get a mic to you.
Libby Viner, ITV News. The Remain alliance, as you say, in Brecon was successful. That was a by-election. How confident are you that that cooperation will actually win seats in a general election?
Well, why don't we take that question to perhaps either Molly or Liz, given that you used to decide in Brecon. How important is it to you in this election? Do you want to start, perhaps, Molly?
I think what you saw from Brecon and Radnor is if you give people an opportunity to choose a Remain candidate, then and if it's clear who that person is, then they will vote that way. Because what I find out in the country and on doorsteps is that, as I said when I was speaking earlier, people who support Remain feel very unrepresented, and they're looking for the person to vote for to have a strong Remain voice in Parliament. And so obviously the numbers matter, and the number of votes we can transfer, if you look back to what happened in 2017, is a part of this. But what's much more important is building the momentum for a Remain alliance, for a sense that there actually is somewhere for Remain voters to go and specific candidates for them to get behind. And so that's where I think the real positive momentum for change comes from.
Anything you want to add, Liz?
And I think there is a message as well that for those political parties, not just within the constituencies where they're standing or where they're standing aside and they've got people going to other constituencies, but the fact that if Plaid Cymru says that Remain is the most significant point to us in this general election, then we can say that, look, point to our actions, this is actually how we are acting in that respect. It's not an empty political slogan, it is affecting how we operate. And it gives, I hope, some credibility to politics that we are putting the issues first. There will be people who disagree with us on the issues, on Brexit or Remain. There'll be some people who agree with us. We're giving a clear offer to those who agree with us. But we're cutting through that line of the two big parties for whom this is something that they're playing for their own party interest, and they will try and say different things to different groups of people. No, our message is clear. This is what matters to us, and this is why we're acting this way.
I'd just like to add a view from the voters' perspective. I canvassed in Ystrogandlais during that by-election on about 5 separate occasions. I was there because it was one of the few places that you could get around in a wheelchair, and it was accessible. What was fascinating was the number of people who said, actually, I'm really pleased that you've parted party differences and are coming together. And we see on social media every day, why can't you work together? Why can't you work together? So I think there is a Unite to Remain bonus, not just about pure party, but about the principle of this new style of politics.
Peter, from your point of view.
Yes, on that particular point, we have actually done some comprehensive polling on the question, if there is a unified Remain alliance candidate standing in your constituency, how would you vote? And the vote for that candidate adds up to more than the sum of the parts of those parties. We saw that to a certain degree in Brecon and Radnorshire. If you look at the data that's been released publicly by Best for Britain, they've done seat-by-seat analysis with this question. So this isn't just about looking at how many votes did each of the 3 parties get and adding them together, because that boost, that bonus is real. It's there in the polls, and it makes a big difference in very many seats.
Carolyn, I saw your hand at the back.
I just wondered, you're talking about working together across the parties, but there are quite a few Labour MPs or Labour candidates now who are absolutely agreeing with you in terms of wanting a people's vote, wanting to stop Brexit. Will you include them in your family now, or will you make perhaps unofficial agreements with them?
Isn't that a great word, family? When do you ever hear that in politics? We are a family. Sal, and then perhaps Peter, you might have a view on that as well.
I think many of us would have loved for the Labour Party to be open to standing back for us where it's appropriate, or for even considering where we might be able to do the same. The problem is twofold. First of all, Jeremy Corbyn stands for Brexit. This is about Remain. That's a fundamental block. And we feel, all of us feel really, really hard for our Remain friends in the Labour Party, particularly those MPs who have, many of them, spoken out in Parliament over the last few months. But unfortunately, in this election, Labour stands for Brexit. The second thing is, Labour have made it plain that under their rules, they will never stand back for any other party. And that, I'm afraid, is part of the old two-party style of politics.
Peter, is there anything you want to add?
Only yes, that final point that we did sort of earlier on in the process, when it looked as though it was possible that the Labour Party may be pivoting to an entirely Remain position, which they didn't in the end at that conference in September. Our early discussions with people in the Labour Party, what we got back was two things, one of which is we are not going to be changing our constitutional position, which is we stand everywhere. And that includes standing seats which are very tight Liberal Democrat Conservative marginals, for instance. They just won't do it. The second issue we had was the great fear on the part of office holders in the Labour Party who basically said to us that I can't meet you because if I'm even seen to be talking to you, I'll be expelled.
Welcome to modern day politics, which is precisely why we're going to try and change it. Thank you. Microphone, thanks, Isabella.
Thank you. Katie Donovan from Bloomberg. Just looking at your list and Guildford's on it, wouldn't it be more sensible if you want a progressive alliance to let Anne Milton have a go at the seat and not split it? Aren't you risking letting the Tories win there?
And it is a shame. I'd hoped, Anne is a personal friend of mine, I really hope she might have left the Tory party and come to the Liberal Democrats, if I'm honest. But actually, I think you'll find it's going to work completely the opposite. Peter, you're probably best, as our compliance expert, best placed to answer that.
Yes, so I mean, you will have seen that in addition to the Unite to Remain initiative, there have been some bilateral agreements in relation to particular MPs, and one that's been publicised is Dominic Grieve. One of the problems with some of the Conservatives or former Conservatives who are standing is that they're not actually Remain MPs. Anne Milton voted for Brexit repeatedly, and so whilst she may be sort of closer to where we are, she is certainly not an unequivocal Remain supporting MP. She's repeatedly voted for Brexit, and that would make it very difficult for us to support somebody like Anne.
And I think, I'll come to you just one second, thank you. I think the other key thing is, and it's unfortunate, and I would love nothing more than to wrap our arms around great friends that I had and still have in the Tory party. But this is no time, I'm afraid, for sentimentality. This is a Brexit general election, and there is no compromise. This is about our last chance to secure that second public confirmatory vote, that second referendum, and with a view to Remain. And we're not going to achieve that through sentimentality. That's very hard, but that, you know, we need to look at the facts here. There was another question, I think, on the front row. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate Evelyn from The Times. Just on a similar note, why is the SNP not involved in this? And indeed, why are there no seats in Scotland?
Well, Scotland is a very, very different dynamic, and what Unite to Remain is about is targeting where it will make a difference, where splitting the Remain vote would make a difference in terms of returning those seats. And I think between the SNP and the Lib Dems in Scotland, Scotland is almost sorted, I suppose. The question is, where is our intervention best placed? This isn't about finding alliances or relationships or standing aside in every seat in the country. It's ones where it'll make a difference. Anything else you want to add on Scotland, Peter, from your point of view? In Northern Ireland, I guess it applies to there too.
Yes, I mean, the issue in Scotland is, firstly, the SNP in Scotland have a similar policy to the party in that they will contest every single seat. And in fact, the SNP are competitive in every seat. The other issue there is that the particular dynamics of electoral politics there particularly can be demonstrated in local elections, where you can see where preferential voting gives you clues to where the votes go, is that there's no evidence that, for instance, a Liberal Democrat standing down in a seat like Gordon, for instance, in North East Scotland, would actually assist the SNP. It could actually assist the Conservative Party, because the unionist versus nationalist question could trump the Brexit versus Remain position. So the electoral dynamics don't work. But what we are hopeful for is that between the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, there will be 59 MPs returned in Scotland who support Remain.
Just having flashbacks to Tory party conference when signs start falling off things. It doesn't normally end well, does it? Gosh, a lot of hands. I have the gentleman there in the blue jumper.
Sam Bright, News. Lots of people have been saying that due to very capable MPs standing down at this election, the next one will be a lot different and worse. How important is this moment for our political culture?
Huge, Molly.
I think that's in a way the most important question and the most important reason we're all here. I mean, we can see from what's happening at Westminster with Brexit that our politics is failing in a sort of mechanical sense, but it's also failing, as you point out, in a cultural sense. And that's where I'd really like to go back to my experience of working in the European Parliament, where because you have a multi-party system, you will never get anything through unless you get along with people. So the first thing you learn as an MEP is don't alienate anybody. It's completely the opposite to Westminster politics, which is where you stick to your tribe and you're offensive to people outside your tribe, and it actually works against you if you're seen to be getting on with other people. So a lot of people that come from Westminster into European politics find it so refreshing. And I think it's really important as well in terms of the gender dimension, because there are some absolutely fabulous MPs, skilled MPs. I may not agree with their policies, but I've really admired some of the women we've had at Westminster, and Heidi is a good example. And they are, for personal reasons, deciding to stand aside from politics, and that's a tragedy for our democracy. And we all have to take responsibility for defending our democracy now and protecting our political culture and enhancing and transforming our political culture. And obviously for me, Brexit is a complete disaster on every front, but it does also give us this incredible opportunity to really transform and change the way, in fact, create a proper democracy in this country, which we've never really had. And so out of whatever chaos lies ahead, let's make sure that we do that together.
Liz and then Sal.
It's out of crises that we find change. And I think there's a potential for change, not just in the breaking of the stranglehold of the two big Westminster parties. And frankly, it's their self-interest that has got us into the position in which we find ourselves now. Of course, we've been working across with very worthy individuals from those two parties and with our parties as well. But surely now is the time to look at entirely different ways of dealing with politics. The Yaboo sucks, the tribalism. This actually, I mean, what is politics but the way in which we deal with different people's interests, different people's strengths and weaknesses, and how it's not just a game, a career game for a few politicians. This now is reaching out to people, and how do you engage? Where are the citizens' conventions of the future? How do we actually get the discussion about the major issues and bring around change, real change, rather than the stranglehold between the two big parties that we've seen here for the last 3 years?
So I take issue with your word worse when you ask the question, because I think if the polls are right and we are back in broadly the situation that we were in the European elections, where it's no longer just the top two parties taking most of the votes, I think you will find there are a large number of new MPs. I hope many Liberal Democrats, but I suspect Plaid and the Greens as well. And we can be that change for the future that the public want. All the parties have been asked by the Committee for Standards in Public Life to change the tone of politics. And one of the things we're trying to do with this particular facilitation is to start to do that and to move away from the Yaboo sucks politics that we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, it's a proper progressive alliance, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's changing things, disruptive. Lady there with the burgundy, purpley jump on. And then there's a gentleman behind with glasses.
Hi, it's Emily Ashton at BuzzFeed. I just wanted to ask about, critics of this would say you're kind of fiddling the system, denying people democracy. What if somebody wants to vote Green in Totnes and you're denying them that? What do you say to people who say that?
I suppose my answer, if I may, this is because the system doesn't work. When people vote at the moment under the first past the post system, millions of votes are lost and wasted. One other thing that we all agree on is a need to change that in proportional representation. But right now we have to work with the system that we have. And what do we say to those Remain voters whose votes will be lost if we just allow the Tory party or the Labour Party, who all they need is about 35% actually to get a majority. So we're having to work within that system to make sure that those Remain voters are not, their voices aren't hidden as they have been. They've basically been ignored by the two main parties. So it's a system that we have to work within. But you know, there are three things that we all coalesce on, the parties rather, through Unite to Remain. One, of course, is that second referendum, proportional representation and faster action on climate change. And there are three things that were very important to all the parties involved here. And there was a gentleman behind with the glasses on.
Thank you, Rob Merrick from The Independent. Can I ask, Peter, you referred to your polling showing that a single Unite to Remain candidate can achieve support greater than the sum parts of the individual parties. In how many of the target seats does your polling show that greater sum of votes can actually deliver victory?
Well, I haven't got a precise number of that. We only finally agreed the seats fairly recently. But what I have done is had a look at the seats on a sort of winnability basis. And this is not a random smattering of seats. If you look at the MRP polling, which is taking a very large national poll and then looking at the demographics of a particular seat, there's a very large number of seats that can be won by a Remain Alliance candidate. If you have a look at the Best for Britain data on this, that does demonstrate the specific situation in a wide number of seats. But I would identify, having looked at that list of 60, that at least 44 of those 60 can be regarded as highly winnable constituencies. That, by the way, is in addition to a number of seats that are not formally Unite to Remain seats, but which are on track to be won by one of the three parties here. So that
just define highly winnable?
Not by a specific percentage, no.
Or any other way? You think you have a very good chance, or does it still rely on other factors, or what does it mean?
Within less than 10% for sure. So these are seats which, we've looked at all sorts of different factors. It's not just current national opinion polls. We've looked at local election results. We've looked at the results of the European elections, and we've looked at the MRP polling, and we've looked at constituency polling. So we have a very wide range of data to look at to help us on this. And to put it this way, these will be seats in which the parties will be putting huge resource because they believe that they can win those seats. That, in some ways, is the best test of what is a winnable seat. Are the parties putting their resources there? Are they sending their workers there? And in those seats, that is very much the case.
And I suppose that's the value add, isn't it, that Unite to Remain has brought to this. It's absolutely targeting with finesse. This is not a blanket approach. This is very, very specific look at individual seats where it'll make a difference. Molly?
I just wanted to say, there's two things going on in politics. There's the numbers, but there's also the momentum. We're launching this today. We can see from the European elections that the majority of voters were very unhappy with the way the two main parties have dealt with Brexit. But once you get to a general election, we're confronted with first past the post. The pressure of that is to squeeze people back into those two parties. Our job is to resist that and to build the momentum for Remain that we know is the majority in the country, and to make sure that people have the courage to resist being crammed back into the first past the post straitjacket. That's what we're trying to pull off. At the moment, we can't guarantee that, but as Peter says, in a large number of the seats we've identified here, we think we can do that, and that will be enough to make sure that Boris Johnson does not have a majority.
Absolutely, and that is the prize, isn't it? Gentleman with the orange tie at the front.
Hi, I'm Emilio from Politico. If Brexit really did come before everything else, then surely you would be standing down in the realistic, winnable Labour targets, because Remain is sort of a secondary point. Really what you want first is a referendum. You can worry about Remain and Leave later, so it doesn't really matter what Jeremy Corbyn's position is on Remain or Leave. Surely the best way to get that referendum at the moment is to have a Jeremy Corbyn government. So what's more important? Is it stopping Brexit, or, as the Lib Dems want, stopping Jeremy Corbyn? And secondly, just looking at your list here, some of it doesn't seem to make that much sense. You've got Bury St Edmunds for the Greens, Stroud for the Greens, Exeter for the Greens. They're all seats where the Greens came fourth in 2017, where the Lib Dems came above them. So it seems like there is some political party kind of trading going on here.
So perhaps, Peter, that second question I'll put to you, if I may. But Molly, do you want to come in on the first part of that?
Yeah, I just want to say that, as I said when I spoke at the beginning, what's gone wrong at Westminster is that there are not enough MPs there wanting to stop Brexit to represent the people in the country that want to stop Brexit.
Or brave enough to stop Brexit.
Well, okay, yeah, indeed. And that's the change we have to make. Now, in terms of the seats, as I also said at the beginning, this is also about fair representation. And Green voters across the country, millions of people think the climate change is the most important issue and would like to see more Green representation, and they haven't had a chance to achieve that. So indeed, there is something for us as a party in that, and I'm not ashamed about that. I want to have more MPs there. I think Caroline Lucas has been absolutely fantastic, and we'd like to have more Green MPs backing her up. So I would disagree with you on both points. This is indeed an attempt to stop Brexit by having MPs specifically with that as an objective when they go to Westminster. And most MPs have not made that their primary objective. But it also is to make sure that our parties are more fairly represented, because that's what democracy means.
Yeah, a few points on that. Firstly, all of our evidence shows that the 2017 general election result really can be completely disregarded. There's been a sea change in politics. The Liberal Democrat vote has nearly tripled. The Green vote has doubled. Labour is polling at approximately 24-25% rather than 41%. Everything is completely different. Yeah. So we're looking at up-to-date data, not the 2017 general election, which is completely irrelevant. Second thing, our polling evidence, which we've also done, shows an enormous value of transferability between the parties. Yeah. In other words, if the Green candidate stands down, it highly disproportionately benefits the Liberal Democrats, and vice versa, and similarly with Plaid Cymru. The important thing about the stand-asides is that tiny percentages go to the Conservatives. And in those Conservative-facing seats, that could be critical. The final point about, well, this party seems to be ahead of that party in that seat. Well, that's the first-past-the-post system. If we were to say, well, the Liberal Democrats ought to stand in every seat where they were ahead of the Green Party, then that would be completely inconsistent with the view of all of these parties that we favour proportionality and not winner-takes-all.
It's a wild and crazy concept, isn't it? Sharing. It's something we're getting very used to. Adam.
Hi, good morning. Adam Payne from Business Insider. Sal, you said earlier you would have loved to at least explore the idea of working with some Labour MPs. And on that point, did conversations take place at any point? What was for a dialogue between Unite to Remain and either the Labour Party or some of its MPs about working together?
I think Peter covered that earlier. Yes, there were in the early days, but it was very heavily rebuffed. Just didn't get anywhere.
From the top?
Yes. I'm not going to name names, yes. From front bench. Yeah.
There's a gentleman with a pale blue shirt just there, and the glasses.
Hi. Hi there. Tony Bonsignori, BBC News. Crunching some of the numbers here. I mean, you want to disregard the 2017 election, but just on the Green Party list at the top, you've got Exeter, combined vote, less than 5%, similar in Cannock Chase, Forest of Dean 6% combined. I mean, isn't a lot of this wishful thinking, really, and isn't what you're ultimately doing is denying a lot of voters a real choice?
I would argue absolutely the opposite. Peter, it's kind of a continuation of the previous question.
I mean, you know, firstly, those percentages simply do not reflect what is happening on the ground now. What happened in 2017 was that there was massive tactical swings of voters towards the Labour Party, away from other progressive parties. All of the evidence we have is that's gone way back plus more. The other thing I would say specifically about a seat like Exeter is that had we been sat here announcing a new party to fight for Remain and standing in seats right across the country, people could very justifiably say that you're splitting the vote, but absolutely we're not doing that. What we're doing is actually making it tougher for the Conservatives to win in those seats where actually their pool of potential voters, which polling shows to be those people who voted Brexit, is so low that actually the chances of them winning doesn't exist at all.
Thank you. Gentleman with the glasses in the middle there.
Max Colchester from the Wall Street Journal. Out of these 60 seats, how many voted Leave in 2016?
Gosh, I feel like I'm sending all the questions to you, Peter, but you are the expert. That's the reason you're on the stage.
I don't know the precise number, but it's a small minority. I mean, you can go through the list and work that out, but it's a small minority.
Yeah, it's where polling has suggested that there has been a definite shift. But, you know, there's a reason there are 60 here, and as I say, not 650, because this is about really fine-tuning resources and energy of activists. It's not about trying to win every seat, because that's just, you know, it's not going to be a practical use of resource. Sal?
But we also know that views have changed since the referendum. So, you know, on your principle, we would have no seats at all in Wales because Wales voted leave. But actually, we know that polls now show that if there were another referendum, Wales would be voting Remain.
Absolutely.
That's what's changed.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, we've seen that 2017 election and also in the European election. If that had carried through, we wouldn't see the patterns that we now see in democracy. But I think we just come back from the psephology questions, if you like, to come back to the nature of what politics is about. We are going out there with a clear message. Part of that message is that we're going out working together on this single point, although we will have many other policy points on which we disagree with because we are different political parties. And again, to be simplistic, this is new. I haven't seen anything like this. When I go out on the street and I talk about people that will be working together on this, people are impressed by this. And I think, you know, for that to come out of this terrible mess that we find ourselves in now, I can only hope that this is a new form of politics. And we'll deal with the fine details of how it actually works out. There'll be a load of analysis of the various seats and how it works out on the ground. But if we haven't got a message to tell as politicians, what's the point in us being politicians?
And the point, I suppose, is this is really last chance saloon on Brexit. And this is the ultimate antidote to the general election, which in our view, I think is shared, has come too soon. And Parliament wasn't able to exercise bravery or its duty, and this was always the backup plan, and this is absolutely critical for this general election. Gentleman who's had his hand up for a little while with a pen in his hand, and then the gentleman in front of him with the glasses.
Thanks. Hugo Jai from the iNewspaper. Liz, are you disappointed that the Liberal Democrats have refused to stand aside for Ben Lake and Ceredigion, especially given that you've stood aside for their only MP in Wales? Doesn't that slightly undermine the sort of principle of fraternal unity that's driving this whole thing?
Yeah, we will have these questions in Wales, and I imagine we'll have these questions in constituencies across the United Kingdom. We are, of course, different political parties, and we've had to come together and we've had to make some difficult choices in working together on this. But if I can come back to the major point for us, our message going into this general election is that as parties, we are seeking a parliament here in Westminster that will work to remain. And although it's difficult for us, although it's difficult for many of our activists, that overriding priority is driving what we need to do. Because if we do not enable a Remain scenario, a second referendum, we will have done, by our inaction, we will have condoned desperate damage to our communities. And it is standing in to prevent that damage is what's motivating us here today in taking these difficult choices and in working together on this, the outstanding issue of our times.
Sal?
Heidi, right at the start, talked about the way that we as the three parties came to the discussions about this. And I think the discussion about Ceredigion, which happened very, very early on, set the entire tone for the debate, where we both recognised we were both in contention. We'd held it in the fairly recent part, and it's currently held by Plaid. Obviously, a Remain party would win, and we just felt that it was therefore appropriate to put stakes in the ground and say, actually, on this one, we will leave that one, and we both understood that. And the Liberal Democrats are grateful to Plaid because you'll see everywhere else, other parties are standing back where there's an incumbent. But on this particular one, it is an example of those progressive, grown-up politics where we agree that there are some times we have to work together.
Yeah. And it's that balance, isn't it? It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's what works in each area individually. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing about a seat like Ceredigion is that Plaid Cymru in first place, the Liberal Democrats are in second place. The next nearest Brexit-supporting candidate is way, way behind. The Conservatives are not going to win Ceredigion. They don't have a hope. So having to try to broker a deal in that seat would have been absolutely pointless, because whatever happens in Ceredigion, it will be returning a Remain supporting MP.
There was a gentleman who had his hand up there we go with the glasses. Thank you.
Charles Hymas from the Daily Telegraph. Just a very practical question. On doorstep, what will be happening to the relative members of each of the parties in terms of how they campaign? Will they be wearing their own plaid and green sort of paraphernalia, or will they be adopting the branding of the MP or the candidate that they're standing for?
Who wants to go for that one?
Well, it's kind of one for Peter,
Molly?
isn't it? Well, just to say, in terms of campaigning, we will campaign. It's about, as Heidi said, it's about sensible allocation of resources.
Yeah.
So we will be campaigning for the seats that have been allocated to our parties under this arrangement. But in terms of, there are various legal requirements in terms of what Unite to Remain is and how it can work, which Peter needs to cover, I think.
Yes, this is not joint candidates. This will be candidates representing those parties in those seats. We have had direct conversations with the Electoral Commission about what can and cannot happen, and the Electoral Commission have issued quite detailed guidance to say exactly how that might work. But this is not about having sort of joint literature, but clearly there may be circumstances where local members or activists of one party may wish to assist in canvassing, for instance, which is allowable under Electoral Commission rules. But it's not joint candidates, it's candidates standing aside in a number of seats.
So if you're saying standing aside, does that mean that the resources of the Greens in a particular constituency can't be used under electoral rules to support the candidate that you've agreed will be the sole Remain candidate?
Correct.
And then I think probably one last question from Ben at the back there.
Hello, Ben Scopard from BBC Look East. You're betting the farm that this will be and continue to be a Brexit general election. But what about, Heidi, in your own former constituency, South Cambridgeshire, where voters want to talk about underfunding of the NHS and of education, two issues that you've campaigned on? This doesn't talk to those issues at all, does it?
No, and you're absolutely right. And I don't think it's my ex-constituents in South Cambridgeshire alone in that. Everybody wants to talk about the NHS, climate change, our ageing population. But the point is, that place is in gridlock. And until Brexit is dealt with, we're not going to be able to talk about any of those things. And that's the heartbreaking reality, which is why I wish we'd got that second referendum through before a general election was decided upon. It's unfortunate, it's wrong, it's not how government should be, it's not how Parliament should be, but it is a reality of the situation that we're in, which is why it's so important for these parties to work together to deal with this as swiftly as possible and get Brexit off the table. But we can't get onto those other issues until, unfortunately, we've dealt with Brexit. Depressing reality, though, that is. Any final comments from anybody? Brilliant. Well, in that case, it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed for coming. As with so much in life, you're stronger when you work together in a team. And, I am sad to be leaving Parliament, but this is unprecedented. Peter reliably informs me that this hasn't happened since 1918, the coupon election of 1918. And I'm proud, actually, that the final piece of work I'll be doing before I give my pass back across the way is to work cross-party like this. Because this is exactly what I thought politics was going to be all about. Country first, leave your rosettes at the door and work together in the national interest. And these three parties, the Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru and the Green Party, for my money, are absolutely leading the way. Thank you very much for coming.